All right, issue number 15, new and emerging technologies. This one seems very interesting because you also mentioned telehealth as well and how that's going to tie in. But, you're seeing all of these technologies now where people are, jumping in front of a computer and let me examine your eyes and send it to somewhere else. But what's the accountability on that? How do I know somebody on the other side is actually someone licensed or actually someone even in the state of California for that matter? Because it's being done online, and as you guys are looking into this, what issues are you running into, and what should we be concerned with in terms of the statutory authority to ensure consumers are safe?
I'll answer in part, and then
please.
So I'll answer the health part. The primary concern would be, protecting the public's health, and the two issues that I brought up is the ability to examine the overall health. Yes, it's on different websites as mentioned in the issue paper, but a lot of consumers don't pay attention. They're looking for convenience, so we are concerned about that. People getting an appropriate eye exam to go with a refraction. In terms of the accuracy of the refraction, there are issues that within a patient's eye health that can actually alter a prescription, and you can't necessarily tell that over a computer exam or what you have to look at the eye. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. If you have a cataract, for example, you can have a certain shift in a prescription, and if I give you that shift in prescription, you'll see clearly. Mm-hmm. But you don't know that there's something else going on in the eye. Something more severe is a patient with diabetes, perhaps, where they have some swelling in the back of the eye. Same thing, that swelling, in fact, shortens the length of the eye, shifting the prescription in a hyperopic or plus direction. You'll see clearly potentially, but you won't know that something else is going on. So that is a primary concern for us and something that we think people should be aware of. And we're doing whatever we can in terms of trying to enhance our outreach, our social media presence. That's one concern.
At the same time, the board has recognized that the technology is here and it's going to continue to come. Mm-hmm. And it does provide access in many ways for underserved communities. But we need to explore the avenue and focus primarily on the scope of practice and the impact on consumers.
And as far as holding them accountable, this is definitely on our radar. We receive a number of complaints regarding this issue. What we've seen so far is that they are utilizing ophthalmologists who are licensed in California but perhaps residing in another state. We have yet to see any instance where an optometrist is involved, so we have we lose jurisdiction because we don't have jurisdiction over ophthalmologists. However, we are working very closely with the Medical Board of California in regards to sharing information, sharing any kind of investigative reports to make sure that the standard of care is followed regardless on who is providing the service.
Got it. And so out of the entities that you've looked at that are providing some of these services, are they registered with the board?
Not with the Board of Optometry. The ones that we have found, they are licensed through the Medical Board as ophthalmologists.
Oh, got it. Maybe that's something we might want to look at in terms of whether we require them to register. If we did require them to register, what would that mean for you guys, for the board?
Requiring ophthalmologists to register?
The entities that are providing these services online, would that help with the accountability? I'm sorry, requiring the companies to register.
Well, in this case, right now, they're medical corporations, and so again, that wouldn't necessarily be our jurisdiction, but it's definitely something that the board is looking at, and we welcome any kind of suggestions to focus our research.
Got it. All right, I think that's my question. I have a couple of general questions, but if you have questions on just the issues. No. Well, Senator Hernandez has a question.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on the new and emerging technology and kind of express some of my concerns with regard to the online refractions. So let's take the telehealth laws that we have now in statute, where you actually have providers, whether it's an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, that will read a retina photo at, let's say, a rural community or a facility that's not close by. When that provider, whether it be a physician or an optometrist, they will do a report, they will read if they see any kind of pathology, but that provider will take on the responsibility, especially when it comes to any type of malpractice or any kind of risk with regard to the validity of that report. So I think it has its checks and balances. You have a physician or an optometrist who are going to be held responsible for that medical diagnosis. I think when we delve into the refraction portion, I have some concerns, and a lot of concern, because let's say you do have an ophthalmologist that's licensed in the state of California, but we don't know who is going to provide that information, and it could be someone else outside of the state of California. And that individual could either be another state or even another country. And just the fact that you have the capability of doing the procedure, you're going to provide a prescription, which they have every right to get that product, the glasses, online anywhere they want. But then there's kind of this perception that there was an eye exam, but you're right, you're going to miss the overall health, you're going to miss prescription changes, you're going to risk possibly diabetics. This one in particular is of the biggest concern that I have. And maybe we can look at that whoever's name is on it, that they ultimately will be held responsible and liable for the overall condition of that patient, so that no one can use that as a license just to be able to do the refraction from, say, another country, India or the Philippines or another state, or an individual who isn't licensed. Maybe we can look at the liability issue of that person whose name is on the certificate, whether it's a physician or an optometrist. So my understanding is right now there is no optometrist currently doing online refractions at this time?
Not to our knowledge.
Not that we know of.
So maybe that's something where the committee can look into, work with the medical board, and have the same kind of liability issues that we do with reading a retina photo, telehealth-wise. And I think that would solve the problem, because that person ultimately will be responsible for the overall health of the patient. Just posing that question.
No, I think it's an excellent suggestion, because that is, you were asking about accountability. Right. There isn't any, where there is for other kinds of emerging technologies, whether it's a retinal photo or other kinds of glaucoma technologies. The person who reads the documents or the photographs is responsible for it, but not here.
And the same is true for like reimbursement. If you have a reimbursement for a procedure, you're not going to get a reimbursement unless it's followed with a outline of the procedure, the outcomes, and then that provider will be held responsible for what they provide. It's like reading a CAT scan. Just because you do the CAT scan, it's the radiologist that's going to be responsible for what's in that reading of it. Whereas my biggest concern is the online refractions, just writing a prescription without any kind of recourse. And I think that's what needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Assemblymember Baker.
Thank you. I think Senator Hernandez is raising an interesting point. I just want to dive a little bit further on it. When we say there's no way to reach them, there's no liability, that may be the subject of another hearing another day, but is it not the case that if whoever signs off on that could be sued in the state of California for, negligence? I realize it would be hard to serve them if they're in another country, but that's the same difficulty that already is there. I'm trying to understand when you say there's no accountability, I understand the limitations in your jurisdiction, but in terms of our state laws and someone who is licensed to practice in California, we can still reach them, I think. That may be an imperfect, but I'm curious if that's the case.
Yeah, in areas where they are licensed ophthalmologists, the medical board would have the authority to revoke their license or take any kind of enforcement action against them. And I believe that that's something that they're looking into as far as making sure that the standard of care was followed. So they would presumably get a subject matter expert involved and investigate that way. But absolutely, if they're licensed ophthalmologists, then there is recourse for them.
And I do have other questions, but I don't know if you wanted to have it specific to the issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to actually follow up first on Mr. Salas' comment. I think it's also a very creative idea that if you're having, for item number 10, I think it was, for having a difficult time staffing the board, at least initially, perhaps considering appointments. I throw out there this corollary to that perhaps the minority party leaders also would be able to appoint one jointly together to make sure that if we're going to do appointments, the governor and then the speaker and the pro tem, perhaps one or two appointments would come from that one. I just throw that extra point of creativity out there. But on issue number 9, the enforcement timeframes, we haven't talked in too much detail about that, but it seems that there's still a problem with the investigation of and enforcement actions, and it's one we've been aware of, and it's not a small issue. It looks like it's still over 200 days for the optometry program and over 150 days for the RDO program. Can you help us understand a little bit in more detail what are the main obstacles to getting the time frame? I think the goal is 90 days.
Right.
And even which would be the number one priorities if we were trying to work on them. So what are the issues that are causing it? And it can't just be staffing, but I understand that. And how would we best prioritize how to help?
Well, for us, a big chunk of that was staffing. We had one enforcement analyst for a good part of a year, and we were working on the most critical cases. With that, we are now fully staffed, and in December alone, we closed 90 cases. So we also have revised all of our processes, and since they were just implemented, we hope to be showing better statistics within the next year.
I would just thank you. Say that we as a joint committee should really continue to be looking at that. That's one of the number one healing arts public health safety issues. I'm glad to hear that there's been some progress in that time. It seems that there have been some points that have taken staff away to other issues like Breeze,
right,
which is unfortunate, and other areas. So we should be working with you to try to keep that a rigorous time frame. Thank you.
Absolutely. I believe that's important. We want to make sure consumers are protected, and the way you do that is with the accountability and following through on all the disciplinary actions. With that, Dr. Pan had a couple of questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just to briefly touch on the new emerging technologies first. I think that, I know it's testified before that it could help improve access. There are people who have challenges getting access to, but ultimately, again, I think as Senator Hernandez said, we don't want people thinking they had access to full care when it was fairly limited. And I do agree that, in fact, the medical board is going to be coming up shortly, so we can certainly follow up with the medical board as well. I think ultimately it's also about establishing what the standard of care is within both ophthalmology and optometry around use of this technology and looking at what's already been established as a parallel in other telehealth as well. So being sure that there's very clear delineation. But I think from a licensing point of view, at least if they have a license in the state, then there's at least some recourse that license can always be removed if someone's not practicing appropriately.
Senator Newman.
Quick question, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So coming back to that question of online exams, and irrespective of sort of the broader scope of practice, from the consumer standpoint, and sort of paying attention to the caveat that you see on some of the sites, for those consumers who fit kind of within the scope of practice, as it were, of the online services, do they feel like they're getting good value? Are you seeing a lot of complaints from consumers, or does it seem as if for those consumers for whom this is a decent avenue, are they satisfied with the service?
So currently we haven't received complaints from consumers. However, I think because the consumers, they don't know what to expect in an eye exam. So I think that's what the main concern is. They wouldn't know to complain because they don't necessarily know that there's a problem. If they get an online refraction, again, they could have other symptoms with their eyes that they don't know about. So I think judging on whether or not there's patient harm or if there's complaints is unfair in this issue because they wouldn't know otherwise.
But if I went online and simply needed a prescription, an updated prescription, and I got one that seemed suitable, and taking into account Senator Hernandez's concern, from the consumer standpoint, I've gotten good value and I have no complaints. So, and my other question is, what's the size of this market and the extent of sort of the issue that we're looking at?
We don't actually know yet. It's a newer technology that's been available, so we haven't had a chance to evaluate that.
Thank you.
Senator Hernandez.
Yeah, I'd like to just, again, follow up on your question, but kind of put in reference what a full comprehensive eye exam is. When you think about the refraction portion of it, it's a really, really small part of it. An entire exam includes the working up of the patient, the medical history, drug interactions, family history. It entails glaucoma testing for pressure, visual fields to see if their overall visual health field is good. It's looking at the retina to look for disease process, the optic nerve, the entire spectrum and how it interacts with their general overall health, whether it's high blood pressure, diabetes, etc. So the refraction is just literally like a tiny part of it. So if somebody wants a pair of glasses and they go online and they get a refraction, I think they're going to be with the understanding that everything's fine, and it may or may not be. In many cases, it might be, but that's my concern about online refraction. Unlike, let's say you're reading a retina photo, you're specifically looking at specific disease processes, and there's value to that because now that provider, whoever it may be, an optometrist or a physician, will look at the disease of that particular patient. So that's my concern about this emerging technology, of how you deal with that and to make sure the patient doesn't think that they're getting a comprehensive eye exam.
And just one quick comment. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and along those lines, the board has directed the outreach committee to try and develop an awareness campaign. Because, again, we don't want to stifle competition, but the standard of care is critical for us. So as long as a consumer goes in knowing, I simply got this and not the whole package, well, fine, but that education piece is critical.
And one more comment, just in line with what Senator Hernandez is saying. As an optometrist, you evaluate all of those things first, and in the absence of anything else, then you dispense a prescription. So once X, Y, and Z has been ruled out, including the health, something as simple as even dry eye, then you dispense a prescription. So I think that also is a concern that, we want to make sure everybody is aware that even though it seems like you can see well, there may be something else happening as well.
Yeah, if I may I want to sort of second what Senator Hernandez said. The challenge is that patients often present, they come in, they have a symptom, right? And they want something to make that symptom go away. And so the problem is that you don't know the reason you're short-sighted and nearsighted or farsighted could be just but it could also be something associated with something else. And so what happens is that you can say, I have a headache, just give me aspirin or Tylenol or whatever, but it could be a symptom of something else that's more serious, and that's why you see a licensed health professional has been well-trained, because they can they ask the questions, they do the exam to figure out, is this just something we can treat symptomatically, or is this an underlying problem? And the complaints won't come until the underlying problem further develops. And someone actually associates that with the initial presentation. And I think that's the challenge that we continually run into when it comes to, someone developed a tool or technique to simply address a symptom, and is the patient satisfied, but they don't know that they may be missing something else that's more serious.
If I may, I want to just give a scenario of a typical example that I've seen where it entails not necessarily just giving a prescription that easily. Here's what happens in my practice when I've seen patients. Somebody comes in because they failed a vision test to get a driver's license, and they figure they need a pair of glasses. Well, during the course of the exam, we find out they're thirsty, they have fluctuation of vision, and it can very easily be solved with a pair of glasses to help them see far away. But that change was due to their increase in blood sugar. This patient, we find out that they're diabetic. We get them to get their blood tests. This one patient in particular had blood sugars of over 400. We get them into a medical home, and the first thing I tell the patient is, look, you don't need glasses right now. You need to control your blood sugar, and most likely once your blood sugar is controlled, you won't need glasses. But this is the underlying problem, and then we need to take care of that. Patient comes back, and we may or may not find out that they may need a refractive error or need a pair of glasses, but that's kind of a typical case of what happens. And so not all instances, just a refraction is going to solve the problem. And that's my biggest concern with the online refraction, and the consumer is going to be misled or thought that everything's okay.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you guys for those comments. Obviously, we want to make sure consumers are protected in the standard of care, and actually doing something a little more thorough. Obviously, everybody up on the dais here is very interested in all these emerging technologies and what it means for consumers here in California as we move forward.
I want to make two comments. First, here today to support granting the extension of the Board of Optometry that's under consideration in this sunset review. Second comment related to the emerging technologies issue. We share a lot of the same concerns that were brought up by committee members and the State Board of Optometry representatives. Just to be clear, The California Optometric Association does not oppose all new technology. However, this is not telemedicine. These online refraction services are not providing the same standard of care that are provided during a visit to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, and therefore we believe this should be prevented, and the California public should be protected from this potentially very harmful technology. Thank you.
Thank you.